20 to 21, there was a 33% increase in the number of people that came into that field. So not only are we working through the dynamics of, hey, there's a lot of people moving around or changing jobs as a whole, there's also a large number of jobs being created in the cannabis industry, which only increases the competition that employers will have in that space to keep and attract top talent. So now we'll pivot here and talk a little bit about what's going on in the South Dakota marketplace and what are some of the trends that we're seeing in employee benefits. So first here, I laid out a little bit of a diagram that I like to use with employers that are first, looking to take a dive into, all right, what's all involved with employee benefits? What should I be looking at offering first? How does this all work, right? So I normally look at it in groupings of types of benefits. So the first group there over on the left, that group 1, that has your medical insurance, your dental insurance, excuse me, and vision insurance. Now, I group those together because typically those are going to be your employee benefits that employees are going to touch most frequently. So insurance, if you got to use it a lot, it's going to be important. And if it costs a lot, it's probably going to be important as well. Now, all 3 of those are going to be ones that most employees are going to interact with in some way, at every year. Whether it be going into the doctor, having their kids get their teeth taken care of at the dentist, or getting a new set of glasses with vision. Now, not to say that they're more important than any of the other groups. I just like to prioritize them that way. Hey, if you're looking at things, group 1 typically is the one that we start with. Now, group 2, having both disability and life insurance, still very important factors in an employee benefits package, because 1, disability insurance providing wage replacement. Yeah, it's not going to be something, hopefully something employees are using very often, but when they need it, it's can have a very positive impact on their lives. Now, life insurance being the same way, providing that death benefit to employees' family members, in the event that they pass. Now, group 3, so the work site insurance and supplemental insurance, a lot of times these insurances are almost stacked on top of what might be offered in group 1. So a couple of carriers you might have heard of that occupy this space would be like Aflac, Colonial, things like accident insurance, which covers you if your kid breaks their arm, hey, we'll pay out, $250 to help you cover the cost of that. It's not meant to replace things like medical, dental, and vision. It supplements it and it tries to subsidize some of the costs that might be passed on to your employees. Now, the last group there, group 4, this has been probably one of the more interesting spaces in the last couple of years. So I have value adds and perks in there. So a couple that come to mind or top of mind there would be things like an EAP, so an employee assistance program, giving your employees access to mental health care and those types of things, legal plans, pet insurance, commuter benefits, gym memberships, all of those almost out on the fringe types of benefits that you can include in your benefits package to target, say, specific employee populations that you want to attract and retain. Now, those aren't necessarily going to be the ones that have real strong, value to your employees, but they can be a good way to round out an offering that you've put in front of them. Now let's take a little bit deeper dive here into medical insurance. So there's a lot of layers within medical insurance. So I'm just going to cover this with some real broad strokes. And we're going to start first with benefit design. So the types of plans that are out there for medical insurance, the first one I have listed there is traditional plans. So these are going to be plans that have been around for a very long time. They have those comfort foods like co-pays if you go into the doctor's office, or like prescription drugs would be a set co-pay. So a lot of fixed costs. Yes, there's a deductible. Yes, there's out-of-pocket maximums, but they're plans people are familiar with and have been around for a long time. Now, the next one, they're consumer-driven plans. Those are newer. They've been around for about the last 15 or so years. A big one in that space being a high deductible plan, where some of those comfort foods or those co-pays that give you a fixed dollar amount if you go into the office or buy a prescription drug, they go away, and plan participants are exposed to a full deductible right up front. The trade-off there is a lot of times the consumer-driven plans tend to be less expensive than traditional plans. And they also offer things like a health savings account that give participants the opportunity to take tax advantages with dollars and sock them away in a savings account that they can use for medical expenses. And the last one I have listed there is virtual first plans. So these plans are plans where we're really starting to tap into technology to deliver healthcare. They're definitely on the newer side of things, but we're seeing more and more of them every day where, hey, if you've got some common ailments and you can talk to a doctor over the phone, video visit, those types of things, that's how people are starting to access healthcare versus more of the brick and mortar style of things. So that's kind of a broad overview of what types of benefit designs are out there. Now, from a premium perspective, a couple of things here I have listed. So a lot of people might be familiar with what I have shown there as composite premiums, which is, okay, if me as the employee, I only need coverage on myself, my rate might be one set dollar amount. If I need it on me and my spouse, it's another set dollar amount. If I need it on me and my kids, a set dollar amount. If I need it on my family, it's a set dollar amount. So 4 different rates, depending on who's all enrolling in those plans. But on, say, family coverage, for example, it doesn't matter if you're a family of 3 or a family of 10, your family rate's the same, right? The other piece that's included in those premium designs is age banded. And this comes into play in particular with smaller employers with less than 50 employees on their health plans. So age banded premiums are where you pay a specific dollar amount based on your age. So me, for example, at 35, I'm going to pay what a 35-year-old pays for the plan. Now, my coworker who's 55, they might pay almost double what I do for the same plan. So as participants get older, the cost of the plan goes up. So that creates some interesting dynamics in terms of if your employees are younger, premiums tend to be less expensive, or if they're older, they're more expensive, or if you've got a lot of families, premiums can be higher. So just something to keep in consideration there when you're looking at plans, particularly for smaller employers. The last part of the medical plan structures I've listed there is a funding design. So this is essentially how you pay for the coverage, right? So fully insured, meaning the carrier that you work with. So I'll use Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield as an example. You pay Wellmark a set premium based on who's enrolled on your plans. Wellmark pays the providers that give your employees health care, the claims dollars that they need to cover the expenses, right? And you pay that set premium to them almost like you're paying a cable or electrical bill. You get sent that bill every month. It's the same dollar amount. It's just a fixed number there. There's not a lot of risk in that game on the employer side of the table. Now, as we move down, Level funding is where you're starting to tip your toe into the risk of how many dollars are going out of our plan. So you have premium dollars coming in, how many are going out to cover medical expenses. Now, those plans are structured to function very similar to the fully insured, where you still pay a fixed amount, but at the end of the year, the carrier might settle up and you would have the opportunity to gain in any potential profits where your premiums that you paid into the plan were greater than what went out in claims spent on medical expenses. Now, the last one there I have listed is self-funded. So a truly self-funded plan, there's not a lot of them out there. You're talking about employers like Google, Walmart, where they are almost fully covering medical expenses that might hit their health plan. A lot of larger employers will partially self-fund, which is where they buy insurance that covers instances of catastrophic claims. That might be a $25,000 claim or a $150,000 claim. It's going to vary a little bit on size. Now, level funding and self-funding, yes, there are instruments out there that you can look at. But the one thing I'll say there is they're really outside of what you can do with your plans until you start getting a little more size. And I'd say that number would be about 50, maybe 75 employees. Those types of strategies start to come into play. So I covered a lot there from a medical plan perspective. Before I move on here, any questions that anyone has on this space?
Tyler, this is Todd. I'll just jump in with a question for you. So when you showed those previous slides, when you had the groups in there, not being a benefits expert, but remind me, like, you have some employers that, jumping into group one's hard. It can be expensive. And so some employers might feather into that over time by saying, well, let's offer some life insurance and let's offer some things like that, et cetera, because they can, because the ACA allows them, et cetera. And that might be ways to begin offering things before you jump in both feet potentially. Because right now, all of our clients and our prospects are just spending a ton of money getting their businesses going, and the revenue is just beginning to flow. So they've had a lot of capital expenditures. And then correct me if I'm wrong, but again, this is all 101. So Molly had a comment on there earlier about, I think when you were talking about age banded, I think maybe she made the reference that they're the worst. We're not advocating for any of these. These all are just what's available out there. And every employer and every employer's situation, based on expenses and compliance and things like that, will dictate or else will kind of push you towards how you craft your plan. So this is just a really high level 101. So not advocating for anything here. And again, employers don't have to jump in both feet into the pool and say, Monday morning, we're going to have a full blown employee benefits plan.
Right. Great points there, Todd. And I'll skip forward here a couple of bit and kind of pivot into, a couple of things that you hit on there, and then a few items on specific to South Dakota. So my last bullet point here, as employers grow, your available options also grow. So typically small employers, so employers with less than 50 eligible employees, you get put in a box a little bit with the insurance carriers where they'll use things like age banded rates and you don't really get an option to do anything else. Some of those doors get opened, once you cross 50, some of them might be down at 25, but that just a general understanding there of the market, being that smaller employees, there's a lot more cookie cutter type plans out there and options might be limited that way. A couple of things here specific to the South Dakota market. Healthcare coverage it's geographically driven. And what I mean by that is when you're going to build out your medical plan, you want to take into consideration where your employees are going to be accessing care and how their insurance is going to work with those providers. So a good example, here in Sioux Falls, we've got Sanford, we've got Avera, we've got a handful of independent practitioners where an employee could potentially get their care if they're living here. Now, that might not be the case in every community in South Dakota. You might only have, one provider in town that's accessible for, your basic, say, primary care. And when you're considering plans, you want to make sure that the plans that you pick give your employees the best access to care. Because there's nothing worse than, having an employee pay, and you as an employer pay money for medical coverage and having to jump in the car to drive across, whatever it might be to get the care that you need. So certainly something to consider in that conversation. And, South Dakota is unique. I always, when I'm having conversations with carriers, it's always, we've got more miles than people. So it's not uncommon for people to travel. But if it becomes a competitive situation for an employee where, hey, I want to be able to use the doctor in town and to go work for you, I got to switch to another doctor, certainly something to consider. The other thing that I'll say here is employer-sponsored coverage or group coverage is maybe a term you'll hear from time to time, is generally less expensive when we compare it to options that employees can go out and get on their own on, say, the marketplace. So buying those individual plans tends to be more expensive than what you can get on a group chassis.
Tyler, maybe one last thing too. As you and I have talked, this industry in particular, the demographics of it, it's young. And so some of these companies, to begin with, the people that are probably most interested in employee health benefits are the senior level people and the owners. And but as your employees push through life demographically, they'll begin to value the need of health insurance and such more. But when they're in their 20s, they're pretty bulletproof, and they probably haven't been sick for a while, probably haven't seen a doctor for a while. So we're aware of that, and we've navigated that with other industries that have similar demographics too. So just know we're aware of that. So when we throw these things out there, and we recognize the demographics of your workforce.
Yep. Now, next here, just real quick here on benefit plan structures as a whole. So not just medical, any type of coverage that you may offer. There's always two pieces that I tell employers to throw into the hopper as they're strategizing around what this might look like. First being eligibility. So who's going to be covered? Are we going to cover just employees? Are we going to cover employees, spouses, and dependents? Are we going to cover part-time employees? Are we going to cover full-time employees? Now, these are all levers that can be pulled as you're making, formulating what your benefits might look like from an eligibility standpoint. Now, prime example on that, if you're heavy on, say, part-time employees, but you're having an issue with getting those people in the door, maybe it's offering coverage to a slot of employees where if you're working more than 30 hours, but not 40, hey, we'll offer you this benefit, right? So those are all things that can be factored into that equation, and they're going to be as unique as your company and your population is. The other piece I have listed there is contributions. So how does the insurance get paid for, right? Is it 100% paid for by the employer? Is it 100% paid for by the employee? Is there some sort of mix where an employer is paying a portion and an employee is paying a portion? Now, with medical coverage, typically that's a split cost. We are seeing some employers where they'll pay for 100% of the employee's coverage or a large chunk of it, and then they leave the employee on their own for covering their dependents. But there again, know your employee population. And if you're drawing a lot of families into the equation, might be more important to invest those contribution dollars into covering spouses and dependents. The other thing I'll say here that I think gets overlooked quite a bit as employers are looking at plan options, you do have the ability to offer plans on a 100% voluntary basis, meaning you don't have to contribute at all to the premiums. You can have the employees pay 100%. A real common one for that is vision, because not everyone needs glasses. Still important to offer it. Hey, it's a low enough expense that we can pass that 100% on to employees. The last thing I'll touch on here on just a little bit of the marketplace here is individual plan options. So a big thing that comes into play with smaller employers, because until you hit 50 eligible employees, there's no requirement for you to offer employee benefits, in particular health insurance. So employees going out and purchasing coverage on their own is not outside the realm of what we see a lot of smaller employers do, especially when they're in the early stages of their business. Now that changes over time. But here in South Dakota, there are options for individuals to go out onto the marketplace, purchase health plans, purchase dental plans, purchase vision plans. And you'll see I threw one stat in there, about 50% of employers with less than 50 employees offer benefits. That's because there's no requirement for them to do so. So that's something where from a philosophical standpoint, you really just got to look at, hey, where do we want to be? Do we want to be an employer that, hey, we're going to take these benefits and we're going to take a paternalistic approach and make it a very rich offering for our employees? And the squeeze on the other side of the balloon there might be, maybe they're $1 or $2 shorter an hour than what the competitor across the street is paying. So it funnels into your overall compensation strategy. And kind of like Todd alluded to earlier, your total rewards with your employees and how benefits and specifically the insurances factor into that is certainly something to look at from a holistic perspective. Because particularly with smaller employers, there are certainly ways in how you pay your people where you can position them well to go out and get coverage on their own versus absorbing some of those plans onto your own balance sheet. Now I'll say that, and then at the same time say, as you grow, that number of employers that offer benefits, as soon as it gets over 50 employees, it's closer to 95% of employers offer benefits. And part of that is because some of the regulations we'll talk about here in the next couple of slides. And specific to cannabis, a couple of things here. Carrier partners that are willing to work with employers operating in the cannabis industry is limited. And part of that being, it's a newer territory as far as in South Dakota. On the medical side of the table, I haven't run into too many problems, but when you start getting into some of those ancillary and supplemental lines of coverage, it can be challenging. There's not as many options to pick from. It leads into lower competition from a rate perspective, but we are seeing that door crack open over time, and things have been getting better that way.
I'm going to jump in here again too. When we talk about benefits, one thing that's not here is employee retirement accounts. And so kind of along those points, difficult for people in the cannabis industry sometimes a lot of times to be able to establish a retirement account, a 401k account. And so specifically Hub last year went out and bought a firm out of Texas that we are able to do that. So we're looking for ways to, until Congress passes some laws that ease things on the industry, we're looking for ways to help the industry. So If you're thinking about something like that, don't hesitate to ask. It's out there. It's just, it takes some looking.
Great point. Great point. And, a couple of things to factor into that equation. So I've listed here, consider bundling services with carriers when possible. So what do I mean by that? So if you decide to implement a medical plan, some medical carriers might tack on, say, vision coverage or dental coverage or even a life insurance policy and essentially bundle it with their medical coverage. Without any concerns of what industry an employer might be operating in. So there's opportunity to get access to coverage through there, and I've had some success that way. The other thing is keep your eye out on the lookout for any group purchasing or captive opportunities to contain costs. So anytime in benefits insurances, if you can leverage those economies of scale, it's a way to get access to not only greater benefit, but sometimes more favorable pricing. And now what I'll say there is those captive and group purchasing coalitions are challenging to set up. It's not a walk in the park. We've seen more of them, not come together than come together. But when they do come together, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of those enter the cannabis space over time. There's certainly something to consider as you're looking at putting employee benefits plans in place.
I would note here too, guys, captives, generally, we think in terms of those are large companies. And so 100 employees or more and such. And the first time Tyler and I heard that there was a cannabis captive that Hub had put together and it was working, we were quite honestly dismissive of it because a typical cannabis employer is not terribly large. It might be 25 employees. But we looked into it. And again, to my previous comments, the reason why it works is that in any kind of insurance, all we're doing is financing risk. So we're passing risk to somebody else. In a captive, you own the insurance company. You are shouldering all the risk. And so how does that work with a small employer? Because you don't have the large number of employees to spread that across. Well, it's because the demographics of your industry, everybody's young. So people want the health insurance. They don't want to pay a great deal for it. And in a captive at times, because they're not utilizing a lot and it's not paying a lot of claims, you quite honestly just gets less and less expensive. So again, it's not easy, but it's out there.
Thanks, Todd. We'll pivot here a bit into some compliance considerations. So, we've touched on, what's out there, what options might look like. The other piece with, administer an employee benefits plan is there are some regulatory impacts that plan sponsors or employers have to consider when they're putting these types of plans together. And the one thing that I'll say here is a lot of the rules that apply to any other employer apply to employers in the cannabis industry as well. So things, such as ERISA, which regulates a lot of how plans can be structured, what types of notices need to be given to plan participants, and things like COBRA. All those pieces are the same for cannabis employers as they are for other employers. I'm going to touch on a few items real quickly. I know benefits compliance probably isn't everyone's favorite topic, but whenever you're looking at these plans, I think the biggest assumption people make is that one, either the carrier is taking care of some of these things for you, or your broker or consultant is taking care of some of these things for you. And nothing will be more eye-opening to you as first-time benefits plan sponsor than if you run into a situation where you're either dealing with some litigation or an audit from the DOL, and we don't know who's doing what, and all of a sudden you're in hot water from a compliance perspective. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things here. First, plan documents. Then some notice requirements, and then lastly, the Affordable Care Act and its impacts on benefit plans today. So plan documents and summary plan descriptions. So like I said, or mentioned slightly there, was a lot of employers make the assumption that, hey, the documents that my carrier gives to me, so the health insurance carrier or the vision carrier, they cover my bases in terms of what I need to be putting in front of employees to make sure that I'm satisfying all the compliance requirements that the government has for plan sponsors. And that's not the case. So a plan document is a document that provides a descriptions of the benefits that you're providing to your employees. So it's going to list out who are the carriers you're working with, what's the benefit that it's providing, who's eligible for those plans. The plan documents also going to have a lot of required language around things like, hey, how's women's health care covered? What happens when people drop on and off the plan? All those rules, right? The cool thing about these documents is they're relatively easy to get set up if you've got a good partner that you're working with that knows their way around these types of things. You build it, and then you make sure to get it distributed to any of your new employees that participate in the plan. And if you make any changes to your benefits, you just get it updated. So it's a compliance box to check to make sure that, hey, all these ducks are in order. And the best example I've seen of when to have a plan document and when it's come into play is if there's any dispute between an employee and employer on how they were able to access benefits or if they were eligible, all of that information should be defined in your plan document. So if you ever get into a situation with litigation, it's almost your Bible per se in how your plans run. And it's not something carriers provide, it's something employers are responsible for on their own. The next thing I'll pivot to here is benefit notice requirements. So there's a handful of different laws and regulations, things like COBRA, HIPAA, marketplace notices, summary benefits and coverage. We love our acronyms in employee benefits. And there's all these notices that you either have to provide to employees when they start as a new hire or when you make changes to your plans. And you'll see 3 times here I have listed have a set process. And I have that, specifically spelled out 3 times here because nothing is more important in benefits compliance than having a laid out, consistent way of getting these required notices in front of employees. So whether it's a part of your new hire onboarding, hey, you start, here's your benefits here's the benefits that we offer. Tell us which ones you want. Here's all the notices for those plans. Check a box, have them sign what they elected, doing that electronically or on paper, but have a process in place to capture that information. The same thing goes with open enrollment that would happen every year where people get the opportunity to change their coverage. Have a process in place, have employees indicating how they want to enroll, file those away in their employee files and keep it by your normal record keeping practices. That way, if you ever run into issues where people either, are debating what they're enrolled in or, dispute something on how you've enrolled them, you have a record that way to point at. And if you do have to deal with a DOL audit, you can navigate some of those things in an effective manner versus, frantically looking for how that process happened 2 years ago. The last piece of that being termination, with things like COBRA, where you have to extend a benefits offer to employees for a certain amount of time after they leave your company, have a process there. And all of these pieces of the compliance puzzle, it's not overly complicated. It's just simply having, choosing a partner that you work with on your benefits that knows their way around these types of things, building out some convenient to use checklists and making sure there's consistency in how this information gets in front of your employees. The last piece of compliance here I'll touch on is the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, Obamacare, all kinds of different names, had a pretty big impact on how, in particular, health insurance is administered and handled at the employer level. A couple of key takeaways from that. There's obviously a lot more than what I have listed here, but these are kind of the big points. The first one being that 90-day maximum waiting period. So if you do offer health insurance to your employees, they have to be enrolled on the 90th day of employment. Now, there's a dozen different ways you can structure your eligibility to make sure that happens, but it's a rule that's out there. And, I might have employers that get closer to that 90-day limit because they have a lot of turnover and they don't want to deal with the administrative work of constantly enrolling employees, or way shorter. It's just a line in the sand the government put out there on when people can come onto the plan. The second one there, no pre-existing conditions limitations. So prior to the ACA, you used to have to apply for health insurance. It went through underwriting. And if you had some pre-existing conditions, maybe you're taking a prescription drug or had a procedure, there is opportunity for carriers to not cover those types of things. That isn't the case with medical insurance anymore. There's no pre-existing condition limitations there. And if someone has cancer, signs up for your plan, it's going to be covered by the plan. The last one there, dependent coverage to age 26. So I think this one in particular has, a big impact on cannabis employers, just because in general, the employees tend to be younger in that industry. And what we run into with employees that are under the age of 26 is they're still on their parents' plan. So benefits, particularly health plan, might not even be in their wheelhouse yet. There's mom and dad are still taking care of them that way. And they don't really have to tackle that until they hit age 26, and then they get booted off their parents' plan and would have to come onto your plan. So a few things there from the ACA that I think are important to include in that benefits picture, and you have to navigate as you're building these types of things out. The last thing there I have listed is an applicable large employer. That's that 50 eligible employee limit that I talked about earlier. If you're over 50, you got to provide affordable health care. So the IRS defines what affordable is, and it's something you've got to stay within. And then there's also reporting requirements. Now, those two categories, like I said, only apply if you're over 50 employees. So that might be out there for most of you, but something to consider as you start getting closer and closer to that number. Now, we covered quite a bit of material today, and just a few things to look at from a next steps perspective. So first, as you're looking at these, really consider benefits as a part of your total reward strategy for your company. And I say that, keeping in mind that there's no one size fits all here. So how your employees get paid, whether in the form of direct compensation or benefits, is going to be a decision you'll need to make at the company level, and factor in things like your employee population. Once you've had a chance to kind of, hey, what does this look like for us? Start looking at what options are out there and who are the partners that we can work with to get access to those plans. Now, what I'll say there is make sure you're working with someone that's skilled in this space. There's a number of brokers that operate in employee benefits and all do a great job of it. But I would, it's a complicated industry, particularly on the compliance side of things, and having a good advocate in your corner to help you navigate and shape these, especially early in the process, will do a lot more do a lot more good than harm. And last there, when you're picking a partner, make sure you're seeking transparency in how they get paid. That's a big area. We see some things going on there, and brokers certainly have to be on the forefront of making sure their clients understand how they get paid, how the carrier is getting paid, all those pieces of the puzzle. Once you've got a partner and plans picked out, implement those plans within the compliance framework. So then again, understand what your responsibility is as an employer, create a consistent and set process to delivering and meeting those compliance requirements for your employees. And then that last step there, and this is probably the most important one of all, assess and adjust over time. So benefit needs they're going to constantly change as your company changes and grows. The same thing goes with compliance. Compliance looked very different in 2019 than it did in 2020 with some of the impacts with COVID legislation that came on. And having the ability to pivot and pivot quickly is something that's very important in the employee benefit space. So that's all that I have for you guys today. I know I covered a lot of material there. Like I said at the beginning, this is meant to just be a high-level overview covering, everything that you could touch on with an employee benefits and some of the compliance pieces. Like Todd mentioned, we help smaller employers and larger employers alike kind of navigate this space, and it's certainly a conversation that takes place over time. And yeah, certainly willing to stick around and answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I think if anyone has any questions and they want to come off mute or put them in the chat, we can take them now. Otherwise, if I get any, you can email them to me as well, and I can forward them on and get some answers that way too. And if we wanted to, for the last, 10 minutes or so, just open it up to anything. If anyone has any questions for anyone that's on, we can do that as well. It's pretty quiet.
We stunned them.
Sorry, guys, USA versus Iran is on, so it's been really hard to focus.
So Deb, are they still leading 1-0?
Yes, but Iran has been playing out of their mind lately.
Okay. I saw the first half, we dominated possession.
Yeah, well, that side of the field must be the lucky side of the field. So the ball has been on the wrong side of the field far too long. So I apologize. I don't have any questions, but
thanks for the score update though.
Well,
so guys, I'll just make like one last comment. You're going to share this presentation with everybody, or they have access to it, right? I would just say, keep it. If you're not ready to do this, just keep it as a reference in your HR file. And like Tyler said, there's a lot of moving pieces and it's complicated. I work side by side with Tyler and I still don't understand it. And so I would just tell you, find somebody to work with. If you would want to work with us, that's great, but just find somebody to work with that you trust, that can help you kind of navigate this and think about it long term and where it fits in your total compensation, because you might be an employer that offers a competitive wage but has some other work attributes that make you a really desirable employer. And so those things matter in what you offer, like how much deeper you have to get into your wallet to recruit and retain employees. So we're certainly not painting that you guys all have to go out and do this. It has to be applied when it makes sense for your organization for whatever criteria that you're facing. It's not a one size fits all thing.
Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can all hop off 7 minutes early.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Thanks, Todd.